Today we have Bryan Kilgore, who lives in Richmond, California. Bryan started randonneuring in 2009 with the San Francisco Randonneers. Bryan has completed three PBPs: 2015, 2019, 2023. A little bit of an overachiever, but we'll talk about that later. Okay. What's particularly interesting about Bryan is that he's achieved a Charly Miller times for two of those three occasions. And if you're not familiar with a Charly Miller time, it dates back to 1901. There was this American rider, and he rode PBP in 56 hours and 40 minutes, right? So since then, many Americans tried to emulate or beat his time. I think there's approximately only 60 or 70 Americans that have actually done this, and it's an incredible feat. But then to do it twice is even more impressive. And what it means is you have to do an average time of 13.6 miles per hour or 21.9 kilometers per hour. And that's including stops. And there's a lot of stops on PBP. So it's really about just trying to optimize your time on the bike, I assume. Finally, if you wait until the end, Bryan will offer us 3 tips to completing PBP in a fast time. Bryan, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Peter. This is great.
Cool. Okay, so I always like to start with this first question,
hmm
and maybe we'll kind of consider your first PBP
hmm
ride, okay? So, like, what does completing PBP mean to you?
It was a really special experience. The first completed it was 2015, and it was just pure elation. I was so happy to have been able to complete it. It felt like such a big accomplishment, and I was able to ride with some folks that I didn't think I was going to be able to ride with. And maybe we can get to that in a
Yeah,
different question, but it was fantastic. It's something I'll never forget. And
cool.
the people on the road, it was just a fantastic
Yeah,
experience.
I always think it's interesting as well. Like, there's the feeling once you get to the
hmm
end, and then there's the feeling months later. So how does
hmm
it like compare the two?
Had a great deal of satisfaction and pride from it for a long time. I actually the post PBP glow acted quite a bit. I was getting pretty high for a while,
Yeah.
and again being able to do it in a fast time was again just a huge point of pride and satisfaction. So yeah, I was riding that high for a while.
Amazing. And since you did it two subsequent times, how did those compare when you finished in 2019, 2023?
Well, the two times that I did it were tougher, and we can talk about the specifics of that. But second time I did it in 2019, and I actually had a more ambitious time goal, hoping to do it in 50 hours that time.
Yeah.
Max
Yes.
Poletto and I,
Overachiever. We've talked about
man,
that before.
uh,
Okay. Yeah.
and and I had backs in that one. I had
Yeah.
some knee pain and some gut issues, but I did still manage to get in Charlie Miller
Yeah.
time. So that was hugely satisfying as well. And I
Yeah.
overcame some low spots during that ride, and
Yeah.
yeah, so that was hugely satisfying as well. And
But am I right in saying like the first time is probably still
yeah,
very special
there's nothing
because
like
you
it.
didn't know what you were. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Cool. Okay, let's take a step back and maybe just talk about your background in cycling and why do you like riding? I
Um,
assume you like riding. I don't know for sure.
Sometimes I do. There's
Yeah.
and your gut isn't cooperating, then not so much. But no,
Yeah.
I love it. And started riding as an adult, kind of in my mid 20s.
Yeah.
I guess I could back a little further. When I was in my late teens and early 20s, I became kind of fascinated with old bicycles. I worked at this salvage yard, and
Yeah.
I old bikes basically out of scrap metal bins, and I would fix them up and I
Yeah.
would sell them and kind of collect them. And it was old Schwinn's primarily, like 3 speeds and cruisers. And I was more interested in the mechanical side and really just I thought they were beautiful bikes, and I kind of collected them and built them and sold them. So I had quite a that time, but I wasn't the actually cycling wasn't really my passion at that time. I was
Yeah.
actually really overweight during early 20s. I was my heaviest. I was about 250 pounds. In
Wow,
my
that's
just
amazing.
yeah, just
Yeah.
bad diet and just unhealthy habits. And so
Okay.
when I was around 24, 25, I kind of made a decision to get healthier, because I knew, if you're obese at that age, your prospects long term are not good. So
Yeah.
I made a very conscious effort to make that change, and I started to ride. I bought a Panasonic touring bike from the 80s off of Craigslist, and
Yeah.
I started to ride. I wanted to be one of those guys that rode up in the Oakland Hills. I would look up into the Oakland Hills and think, oh man, just if
Yeah.
I could pedal up that hill, that would
Yeah.
be such a big accomplishment. And
Wow.
it was incredibly hard. I to cycling as a very unfit person, it's really rough. It's just a lot of, there's that, when you've achieved a certain level of fitness, there's that, the good exertion feeling where, you're pushing hard and it burns, but it
Yeah.
feels good. uh it's just pain,
Yeah.
and it's
I
just
know.
struggle.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I sort of had to fight through that for the first about year that I was riding before I kind of shed
And
some weight.
what
And I
motivated you, Brian? Like, what kept you going? Because I ride because it makes me feel good, but
Yeah,
obviously in the beginning it didn't work for you, no?
I knew that I would get there, and I was very goal oriented. I really wanted to be a fit person, and I knew it just took. I just had to put in the time and do the hard work, and eventually I did get fit, and eventually started to, do club rides. I rode with the Oakland Yellow Jackets, and I did a little bit of, and actually by the time I started doing club rides, I was, roughly the same weight that I am now. I'm about 180, 185 pounds. So,
Yeah.
that's considerably lighter than 250. Um,
Yeah.
I was starting to get pretty fit, and I started to learn, how to ride in groups, and kind of
Yeah.
understand the dynamics of ride. And I think within the Oakland Yellow Jackets, there were some people that went into doing racing, and then some people that went into doing more long distance stuff. And a lot of my friends, that I was riding with, kind of gravitated towards the long distance stuff. Jason Pierce was a good friend of
Yeah.
mine, still is, but he was one of the people, and also Alfonso Estrada. They were a couple of people that started doing longer brevets, or started doing brevets period in about 2007, 2008.
Wow.
And I
Yeah.
saw them doing it. I'm like, man, maybe I could do this. And it sort of,
Yeah.
I kind of, it, I felt like maybe I should give it a try.
Yeah.
And yeah, in 2009, I didn't even do a 200K. I went right to the 300K. It was
Overachiever. Yeah.
whew,
Okay.
it
Yeah.
was it was a, it was a humbling experience. I rode
Yeah.
this very heavy touring bike, and I brought way too much stuff, and kind of the classic first brevet story where,
Yeah.
you got too much on your bike, and you don't really understand nutrition and all that stuff. So I
Yeah.
made it through, but it was very tough. And but then I rode a lot of double centuries that year, and then in subsequent years I started doing more double centuries. And I think in 2010 I did the Terrible Two, and I ended up with a, relatively fast time
Hmm.
on it. And I kind of realized, oh, maybe I can actually do some of these rides, relatively fast. I think it was,
Yeah.
12 or 13 hours or something,
That's
not,
amazing.
not
For
at
that
the,
ride, it's amazing. Yeah.
yeah, it's, and so kind of gave me a little bit of confidence on, trying to ride for time. A lot of them would ride, just with my friends and sort of do a casual pace. And I wasn't super ambitious about watching the clock on
Yeah.
brevets. But on some double centuries, like Devil Mountain Double, I would sort of see how fast I could do it. And yeah, I ended
Yeah.
up coming away with some pretty good times in that. And
And Brian, like, has your like you started off for fitness, isn't that
mhm,
right? Like you just wanted to get fit
right.
essentially, and then you achieved that goal, I suppose. But did your like the reason you ride has that changed over time or not
Uh,
really? Because you're now a fit guy, right?
sure,
So
sure.
yeah,
Well, I guess the other, to the question about, why I ride and what I get out of it is, there's a lot. I mean, not just for fitness and for, basically working out. I mean, it's a way to connect with people socially. You can use it practically as far as commuting, and you can
yeah,
explore, you can tour. I also really enjoy mountain biking and
yeah,
gravel riding. So there's so many different parts of something that love, and what I love about it is that it's such a diverse. There's so many different types of experiences that you can have on a bike, and
Yeah.
it just keeps it interesting. So the long grind of a road ride to like the sort of flow state of descending a technical mountain bike course, exploring a
Yeah.
mountain range far away. Just the versatility or the
Completely.
diversity of experiences that you can have is something
Yeah.
that keeps me engaged.
Brief tangent. I know you've got a wife and a daughter, right?
Hmm.
So has
Yeah.
that changed your riding at all?
Uh,
Or
yeah.
yeah. How old is your daughter now?
She's 4.
Oh, wow.
So she
Okay.
was
Yeah.
born 1 month after PBP 2019. So
Oh,
my wife.
you kind of record time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yes, exactly. I don't remember dates or anniversaries, but PBP, that's
Yeah.
no.
That's
So
funny.
so yes, it has changed a lot. I definitely don't have as much time to ride as I did before. And the pandemic obviously that kind of was
Yeah.
disruptive. But my child was young, so I was kind of at home anyways. But I do
Yeah.
still get out. I am still able to do brevets, and I was able to prepare for PBP. Changed my life. Uh, so
Yeah. I had a quick look at your Strava. It's fallen off a little bit, frankly. Okay.
I know
No,
oh God,
okay.
it's
Yeah.
embarrassing, frankly. Yeah,
Yeah.
fewer
So
miles
my
this
kids are
year.
old. Yeah. My
Yeah,
kids are older now, so I've just doubled down basically. I ride
yeah.
all the time.
Oh man,
All right.
someday. Yeah.
Cool. So back to PBP. Like maybe how did you originally hear about PBP and why did you decide to attempt it?
I only heard about it on one of my first few brevets because that people tend to talk about it on brevets. You see the jerseys,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's this very storied. It's When I first heard about it, I thought that it was just too much. I had it seemed crazy.
Yeah.
So I
Definitely.
didn't when I first heard of it, I did not think that I would ever do it. As I started to try longer distances, and I did a 400K, I think in 2010, and I think in 2011 that was a PBP year, and a lot of people I
Yeah.
knew went and did it, but I was just starting to get into doing longer rides. I think I did a full series. That was my first full series,
Yeah.
was 2011, and once I started doing those longer rides, I kind of realized, oh, maybe I am capable of this. I did a 1,000K in 2012, and after I did that, I
Wow.
said, well, and that was a hard one, and well, maybe this is possible. See,
Can I ask how old were you for your first PBP?
I was 33.
See, that's young, isn't that right? That's on definitely on the young side.
Yeah,
And
no,
the average age is like 50 or
yeah, which I'm
yeah.
not even
And
there
it was
yet. So,
pre-kids, which is key, isn't
yep,
that right?
yep,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
I heard about it, and again, I probably was physically capable of doing it in 2011, but I just didn't quite have my act together, or
Yeah.
as you know, it's a to plan for it. It's a very long process. You can't just
Completely.
decide to do it in June and then go in August. So I didn't do it that year, but I think so many people, had great stories and experiences there that I decided that I should give it a shot in 2015.
Amazing. Cool. And then how did you maybe kind of learn, educate yourself on a possible strategy, or even start thinking about Charlie Miller, for example? Because
Um,
that's a different level almost,
yeah,
isn't it? It's a different level of sickness.
yeah, indeed,
It
indeed.
is. Yeah.
I had forgotten what had first sort of given me that thought, but I was reading my ride report from then, and I think it was actually our RBA Rob Hawks kind of
Yeah.
casually asked me on a ride in 2014. He's like, "So, are you thinking about trying for Charlie Miller?"
Yeah.
And I probably didn't say yes at the time, but it sort of sparked the thought process, and it was like, oh, it sounds crazy, but I think it's possible. So I wanted to give it a try. Um, in I again, and I was for a randonneur, I was on, I guess, the faster side. I wasn't super duper fast,
Yeah.
but I was relatively strong. So I figured if I really trained hard and focused my effort and tried to just make a big push that year, then I might be able to do it. Um,
That's incredible.
yeah,
And then how did you actually then figure out how to do a Charlie Miller like? Because there's a lot of preparation, particularly for that idea, really,
right.
isn't that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Jan Hein had a post that he put in a Bicycle Quarterly about sort of
Yeah.
target times for
Okay.
reaching goal and the average speed that you have to use that you have to ride to achieve it. And kind of I scribbled that down on paper and sort of figured
Yeah.
out what time based on my start time that I would need to hit each control. And I worked out my nutrition. I made sure to I was using a lot of hammer products and
Yeah.
so I kind of figured out what worked for me and what didn't work in all the qualifiers, and I just focused on really trying to ride fast and a lot during the lead up to it, to try to get ready.
Yeah. And Brian, like, did you know that you'd ride it with others, or was this something that you thought you'd be able to do yourself?
I knew that there were a couple other SF randonneurs that were going to try
Yeah.
for Charly Miller. Leto and Carl Anderson were both going to try for it, but they were in the A group. They were in, and I was in the B
Yeah.
group. So they
Yeah.
were going to start before me. And there was also and I didn't get into the A group. I was in B. So Aaron Mason, who's a really strong rider, who was in the B group, and I saw him at the start, and he was kind of considering going for Charly Miller. I think he actually may have attempted it, but it didn't end up working out for
Yeah.
him. But I basically figured, once the gun, once we were off, I
Yeah.
just kind of had to, surf wheels and try to stay in because there's this huge pack. It's just a big
Yeah.
peloton, and I was very conscious about where I was. I didn't want there to be big splits in front of me. I wanted to kind of be, sort of
Yeah.
racing type strategy where you want to be near the front but not on the front, so that if there are splits, then you can bridge across. You're not
Yeah.
caught way in the back. So I was in the early going. I was very attuned to that, and I felt good. I was riding really strong. So I
Yeah.
not go in with teammates per se.
Yeah. And can I just maybe ask you about that then? Because I know then you met up with those two people from SFR. I read your report.
Right,
Like thinking about that versus you could have been by yourself with lots of other people you didn't know.
right.
Do you think there's an advantage to riding with people you do know?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I
Okay.
possible to do it without a team, but I think it's so helpful because not only can you draft each other and can sort of help each other through the lower points. Whereas if you're just with
Yeah.
a bunch of random guys, they're not going to necessarily wait for you if you're having a rough time. And so yeah, I think that and in the sub I did go in with, and the people that I
Yeah.
was riding with, we coordinated our start times and we made sure that we were all starting together.
Yeah. Can I go back to the start line actually? Because
Sure.
I just personally remember how nervous I was. I didn't know where it came from. Like,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of logistics and everything. Tell us about that. Like, once you get to that start line, it almost feels like a relief in
Oh,
many
it's a
ways.
huge relief. I mean, just the logistics of getting, the hotels and the bike check and
Yeah.
making sure that your bike is in order and yeah, it feels like the stakes are really high, because
Definitely.
you've come all this way, you've spent all this money, you've spent all this time, and yeah, if any one thing went wrong logistically,
Absolutely.
then you could be, you know, sink your PBP attempt. So yeah,
Yeah.
I agree that getting to the start line was a huge relief.
Achievement.
Just, with
Really,
my
yeah.
bike
Yeah.
intact and functioning, yeah,
Completely. Like
yeah,
I always felt like, once you get to the start, right, all those problems go away, all
hmm
those concerns, and then you've got a completely new
yep,
set of concerns,
yep,
which is what it's really about.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's cool. Well, I know I have another question here.
hmm
maybe just give us a little bit more about your first ride, that first time you did it. You don't have to go into huge detail, but I'm definitely interested in like low points, high points, how you guys helped each other during those kind of emotional
Yeah.
upswings. And also, what is it like to just ride nonstop pretty much for 55 hours? It's crazy.
Oh man, it's lots of highs and lows, for sure.
Yeah.
I so talking about kind of what happened on my first ride. I started off in the B
Yeah.
group, and I was basically on my own, riding with a bunch of random folks. I don't speak many other languages, so my communication was
Yeah.
limited. But I was in a pretty fast group for a while, and as I think I was about 400K in, somewhere near Fougères, and we're coming up on a group, and I see a couple of San Francisco Randonneur jerseys in this group,
Oh.
and I realized that it was Max and Carl. So
Yeah.
I had actually bridged up to them. I'd bridged a
Wow.
15-minute gap up to them, which I was really amazed that I was able to do that. I know
Yeah.
that was going to happen, and once I reached them, I decided to stay with those guys because I know them. I've ridden with them, and so I ended up sticking with them for the rest of the ride, and it was great. As low points, I actually had a pretty good ride in 2015. I
Okay.
didn't have a ton
Yeah.
of low points.
Yeah.
The second night is always really hard, because in the 80-hour start, you start in the afternoon. You start about 4 p.m. and you ride through the first night. That's usually not a huge issue, but the second night is very rough
Yeah.
because you're really getting
Yeah.
into serious sleep deprivation. Those wee hours are just you're nodding off. We did for about a half an hour in, I think, inbound,
Nice. A half an
and
hour. Good.
oh
Okay.
my
Good. Yeah.
God, it was not the best sleep I've had.
Yeah.
But we had a goal, we were on a mission, and so we just kept going.
And Brian, does it feel like, the whatever the average speed you have to keep going, 13.9 or whatever it is, like you must feel that urgency all the time. You just can't relax, can you?
Yeah, exactly. And I did find, because it was very fast at the start. You're in this big peloton. You're going
Yeah.
25 miles an hour. Once you're once it's broken apart a bit and you're with a smaller group, you're going much, much slower. You're going,
Yeah.
again, 15 miles an hour. But uh, if you keep moving, then you'll still maintain that speed. There was many points where I didn't feel like I was riding fast at all. I felt like
Yeah.
I was very slow, but the staying on the bike and just relentless forward progress, as they say,
Yeah.
was kind of the key. Um, uh,
Like I always think it's interesting because you were riding with two other people suddenly,
mhm.
then you do think about, you don't want to hold them up.
Right,
That's as opposed to when you're by yourself, you can do whatever you want, which
right.
is great. But that's not it wasn't an issue for you, or
No, it wasn't too much of an issue. At
yeah.
least physically, I felt pretty good. I had a couple of mechanicals. I had a flat tire and my chain
Yeah.
broke. Max was kind of irritated with my quick link, Whipperman. He'll get angry.
Okay. Huh.
Uh,
Okay,
but
good.
um,
It's
but no, but like you said, that there are inevitably going to be low points for all the riders, and
yeah.
they come at different times. So that's always going to affect the group dynamic. Now, I think Carl had a really low point as we were inbound. I think it was before to last Villain La Joelle. He
Yeah.
was having a really tough time, and he was even saying, you guys should go ahead, don't worry me. And we were looking at the time and trying to figure out, like, oh, we wanted to wait,
Yeah.
but trying to figure out what we should do there. And luckily, we were able to. Back in the game, he had some food. We rested a little bit, and he stayed with us. And I was really that was important to me. I really wanted.
Yeah.
I had this idea of the three of us, getting back together,
Yeah.
and I'm really glad we were able to do that. But
Yeah.
he was
It
having he
it
was having some
yeah.
trouble.
It's almost like a foxhole mentality or
Yeah,
something, isn't that right?
absolutely.
The other thing I think is interesting is that in our normal lives, right, we just live our lives. We go to bed every night. But you're doing something. You didn't sleep for whatever 50 something hours,
Right.
which at times can lead to you not being your best Bryan. Isn't that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's the amazing thing about it. Isn't that right? Like you're around people at exhaustion, all that kind of stuff, and you
Yeah.
just got to push through all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely was, it was tough. I mean, you try not to get snippy with each other. um,
Yeah.
but,
Yeah.
sometimes, and again, luckily we were very focused on the goal, and, we definitely, there's some hallucinations for sure. When you get to that point,
Definitely. Yeah.
seeing things that aren't there in the periphery
Yes.
of your vision.
But But what's interesting to me, Bryan, is that you kind of happened upon them essentially. Like you
Right.
didn't have a plan to join with those two others.
Right.
And then was there any kind of communication about, okay, we're going to join forces, we're going to do this? Like, because you don't really, well, you know these people, but
Right.
you hadn't planned to ride with them. Is that
Right.
right?
Yeah, I think that they welcomed me. They didn't
Okay. Yeah.
tell me to get lost or anything. I mean, they were
Okay.
excited to see me, and I think at the end
Yeah.
of the day, I think they were surprised, as was. But no, I think that, they welcomed having a third person with them, because
Yeah.
that's one more person to take pulls, and yeah, for it in a lot of the qualifiers. So it wasn't as though I was some unknown, person
I
to
get
them.
you. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So maybe let's talk. So you did Charly Miller your first two times,
Mhm.
and then the last iteration, 2023, you had some issues and you didn't make Charly Miller.
Right.
So, but you kept going essentially, isn't that right?
I
With an
did.
injury and everything. You want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, yeah. 2023 was rough. It was, with Max. Carl, had to. He wasn't going to try for another Charly Miller.
Okay. Yeah.
But Max and I were both, gonna really go for it. And my preparation wasn't quite as good as it had been in previous years. I had done a lot
Yeah.
more indoor, riding, because
Yeah.
I have a wife and kid, and my time is just at a premium. So it's hard to
Yeah.
it's just hard to make the time that I was able to do in previous years. But I did train pretty hard.
Okay.
And I was riding pretty well. We made it about 750K, and we were on track to do Charly Miller,
Yeah.
Max and I. And I just started to have this real nagging pain in my left knee, and
Yeah.
I took some ibuprofen, and I kind of moved around in the saddle, and, it was just getting worse and worse, and I was slowing down a lot. And eventually, Max and I, talked it over, and he was still feeling pretty good, and he stayed with me longer than he needed to. He was very
Yeah.
generous with his time, and with, sticking with me, because, we'd ridden in 2015 and 2019, and he's a great riding partner, and, we work really well together. So
Yeah.
I think, eventually he realized if he wanted to do Charly Miller, then he couldn't stay, which I totally understood, and
Really.
I had to go on ahead of me, long before he did.
Yeah.
But it was extremely painful. I don't know exactly what happened, but it may have been the saddle was I was on a different bike this time. It was a
Yeah.
bike that I had ridden pretty extensively, but, it wasn't the same that I rode in 2015 and 2019.
Yeah.
And so I'm not exactly sure what happened. I know the fitness was not quite as good, but I think it was good enough. But
Yeah.
the knee thing just totally derailed me, and I was holding out hope. I was really, even though I was slowing down quite a bit,
Yeah.
I was trying to do the calculations of how long, what average speed I would need to hold to still do Charly Miller, and I was really,
Yeah.
I didn't want to let go of it, and I
Of
just kept
course. Yeah.
pushing and pushing, and eventually it became clear that I wasn't going to make it. Um,
Yeah.
but by that time, I was already kind of well into the third day, and
Yeah.
I decided to just keep going. And, I could have, did I didn't know how severe the injury was. It was pretty bad. So I didn't know if I was doing
Yes.
permanent damage, or a
Okay.
term damage,
Yeah.
but I kind of had this, like, mentality of,
Yeah.
you have to keep going. You
Yeah.
can't stop.
That's crazy. Yeah.
So I
And do you
really,
think was there ever a chance that you weren't going to actually make it? Like, were you worried that you wouldn't finish? It was just, or you knew you'd finish. It was just a matter of time, really.
Um,
Yeah.
I I think that yeah, I think that my finishing was in question for sure. I didn't know that I was
Okay.
definitely going to be able to finish. Um,
Yeah.
I probably the smart thing to do would have been to stop and sleep for 8 hours and get some
Yeah.
food and just
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
chill out and relax a little bit before I pressed on. But I kind of had that
Yeah.
mentality of just
Yeah.
pushing as
There's nothing smart about what you do
no
if you're inspiring,
no.
Brian.
Uh,
So, but you had an amazing time, isn't that right? You were in 60
Six,
hours something.
yeah,
That's
61, 48 was my finishing time, which
that's
is good. It's a
incredible.
good finishing time.
Yeah.
And
So here, yeah, here's a question. Did you feel in some ways that you had failed or whatever? Like, were you disappointed at the end or not?
oh yeah, definitely. I was definitely
Okay.
disappointed.
Yeah.
when you put all this time in and being able to achieve it was a disappointment for sure. I mean, I don't know how much I could have done to change the
Yeah.
outcome. So
Yeah.
you don't want to beat yourself up over things that are outside of your control. But it was definitely disappointing. But
Yeah.
I mean, I was proud of myself for fighting through.
Definitely.
Probably the
Yeah.
hardest ride I've ever done. And
Yeah.
it was satisfying to finish. Didn't achieve the goal, but
Yeah.
in
So
a,
that was your third PBP. Can
yeah,
we celebrate that, Brian? Yeah.
yeah, thank you. Thank
Okay,
you.
that's pretty amazing.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Here's a question. So you've done it three times
Mhm.
now, right? And how has your strategy evolved over those three times, right? I'm sure you've learned a lot with each time.
Yeah, absolutely. Have my training has evolved. In 2019, I think I took a much more sort of structured approach. I started riding with a power meter.
Yeah.
I structured training. I lost more weight. I got, skinny for me. Uh,
Yeah.
and Yeah, I was probably the best shape of my life in 2019. So this
Yeah.
was definitely really in that year. And also dialing in nutrition. That's one of the biggest things that take away was figuring out what's really working for me, and that changes. In
Yeah.
2015, I did a lot of maltodextrin, and then in some subsequent rides, it hasn't really agreed with me as much. So I've had to up of real food and powder, and figuring out how many grams of carbohydrates to be taking in
Yeah.
every hour, and electrolytes, and kind of getting nerdy on stuff. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's almost like, Brian, you started learning a lot more the second time,
Yeah,
right? Isn't that right?
right.
Like you were, you know, and did you actually do better the second time? Was it easier the second time or not?
It actually, I don't think it was. And
Okay. Because
um
you knew more, basically.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
I think so. There was a couple of factors that made the second time harder. I think the biggest one was
Yeah.
that we were in a later start group. We were in the E group, and so we had a much smaller.
Yeah.
And Max and I were trying to get this group of like 8 guys organized. Whereas if you're in the A or the B group, you're just surrounded by a massive peloton that's just going, you know,
Yeah.
pretty darn fast. So we had to burn a lot of matches early in 2019 to do what we did. But it was a big learning experience. Is starting in the A or the B group is very important if you want to
Yeah.
catch time in those early kilometers in the big fast group.
Yeah. I'm always interested as well about just how people deal with controls. Isn't that
Hmm.
right?
Right.
Because when you're with two others, as you were, like you'd really need a plan. Isn't that right?
Oh yeah.
You just can't wait around. You just need to go in and out. Maybe tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and it's really good about that. When we're doing the qualifiers in 2015, this when we were at because we were trying to beat certain times on SFR brevets, and so you were very efficient at controls, and before we control, we would communicate. We'd say, okay, look, we're gonna,
Yeah.
this is what I need to do. I need to go to the bathroom. I'm going to get this to eat, and we're going to eat on the bike. We're going to spend 10 minutes here, and then we're going to go. It was
Yeah.
very, there was a lot of communication before you reach the control.
Yeah.
It's sure that nobody's, messing around too much because yeah, I mean, it's really easy as you know. I mean, every randonneur I think has experienced this where, especially the bigger the group is, the more, again, more
Yeah.
people are not being efficient. So focusing on efficiency was obviously that was a huge one, and Max was really good about kind of keeping us on track.
Yeah. And I'll ask you about the last one you did, which you didn't do, the Charlie Miller, because
Right,
of your injury.
right,
Had you kind of changed? Was there anything dramatic? You obviously hadn't trained as much that time,
right,
but you were bringing in even more experience. Isn't that right?
right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
And
that
like, were there, yeah.
I think that my experience definitely did make up for a little bit of lack of fitness. I found that in randonneuring across the board, knowing your body and knowing when to let that group go or to sit in with a group that's maybe a little faster than you want to be with, or again understand these dynamics and being very efficient are things
Yeah.
that are really valuable, and you can that goes a long way. I did again. I did train pretty hard in 2023, and I fit, but again, it was hard with the time.
Cool.
I just wasn't able to do the volume.
So, Brian, we've got two more questions. The next obvious
Mhm.
question is, will we see you in 4 years' time, 2027? And if so, is it a Charlie Miller year, or you're just going to join the mortals?
Oh my God! At this point, it's really hard to say. After I
You're on a
finish,
streak, Brian. You
I know.
can't give up, man.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. It's to say. I mean, I think I do want to do PBP again, and I do want to ride
Okay.
it at a much slower pace. Just to it. I feel like every time I've done it, I've been going for time, and I feel like some part of the experience, or I haven't
Yeah.
kind of experienced what a lot of people talk, when people talk about going into the towns and sitting down and
Yeah.
having a coffee and having a
Yeah.
croissant
I
and
can tell you all about it, but
yeah.
that's later. Don't worry. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
But no, that's a big part of. I mean, I really feel like PBP is a cultural experience. You're really immersing yourself in this culture that is beautiful and very old, and they're so cycling mad there. It's wonderful. It's so cool. And I
Yeah.
feel like when you're riding for time, you don't really get to experience that in the same way that you would if you were riding a
Yeah.
more leisurely pace. And again, you don't have the same physical. It would be so much easier and more mellow to attempt it in
Yeah.
a more civilized way. Now that being
Yes.
said, it is tempting to go back and try for another Charlie Miller. I'm 42 now, so I've got
Yeah.
I've got some more PBPs in me. But
Brian, can I point out one
yeah.
thing,
Mhm.
because I read your 2015 report.
Mhm.
Was it 2000? Maybe it was 2019.
Uh,
Sorry. And at the end of the report, you're musing, well, maybe I'll just go and hang out next time, go slow, enjoy
yeah,
myself.
yeah, I know.
I'm not sure you can, Brian. Can you?
Oh,
Really? Yeah.
it's yeah, it's hard. And
Yeah. You've got issues, Brian. That's what I'm trying to say here. Okay. Yeah. This is an intervention, in fact.
oh my
Yeah.
God,
Okay.
yes, I need it. Uh, no, at this point, the jury's out. There's a lot of beautiful places to ride in the world, and
Yeah.
a wonderful experience. But I'll get a solid
Yeah.
a solid maybe for 2017 or
Yeah.
2027.
Like, I think, as someone with a 134-day Duolingo streak right
Hmm.
now, it's exhausting, right?
Yeah.
Streaks can really just box you into
Oh,
your life. But yeah, I hope you make it, Brian. And it'd be cool because you could actually rack up quite a few PvPs. Am I right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, like maybe the injury was a kind of a positive for you. Maybe it allows
right,
you not to think about Charlie Miller all the time.
right. Yeah, I agree.
But who are we kidding? You're going to be back for Charlie Miller next time. Okay, whatever. Okay, so the
Uh,
last question,
uh-huh.
and this is what I ask everyone. So it's basically three tips from your experience on how to ride PBP quickly. I
Mhm.
won't say Charlie Miller, but maybe Charlie Miller. So we'll just go tip one, tip two, tip three, if
Okay,
that's okay. All right.
absolutely. So it's a little technical, but not too bad. But the main
Okay.
thing, you should know where you need to be at what time, and have a best case scenario, and have a plan and have a plan B, because a lot of the time, if plan A isn't going according to plan, then it's very easy to just say to heck with it, I'm not gonna try. But if you have a plan B, then that allows you to sort of reassess your goals as you're going, and it just you can really know where you are. And so the second one is really working on nutrition, which that's true of pretty much all randonneurs, is figuring
Yeah,
out what your body, what agrees with your body, and what types of fuel you need to operate at your best. And there's a lot of stuff out there but it's not gonna agree with your gut, then you're gonna have a bad time. So,
yeah,
carry what you need with you, and um, being really being able to minimize stops, practice, getting in and out of that convenience store quickly, and making sure that the people that you're riding with are on the same page, and just being when you're doing your qualifiers, just make sure that you are just hyper focused on efficiency, because it's not about the absolute speed on the bike. You lose time when you're off the bike. So minimizing time off the bike is really the key. I When I was on all of my PBPs, there was many times where I felt like I was riding very slow, and but I was riding, and keeping that forward momentum and thing to being able to do a fast PBP or a Charly Miller.
perfect. Cool. Really good tips. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah.
Brian, really appreciate your time, and obviously we'll see you in 2027.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'll
to
see you
be
out there.
determined if it's Charlie Miller or not. Okay,
Yeah,
but thanks
absolutely.
again. A really very helpful.